Hello, welcome to Unit 2, Day 2. Today's aim is how are organisms organized? And we're going to talk about levels of organization in different organisms. So let's go ahead and begin. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, today's aim is how are organisms organized? And organisms are living things. So that includes plants, animals, and even much smaller things like bacteria. So your Do Now question asks, what is the name of the theory that proposes that all organisms are composed of cells? And hopefully you remember from day one, considering it was just yesterday, that that theory is called cell theory. And cell theory says that all organisms are composed of cells, that the cell is the basic unit of life, and that all cells arise from pre-existing cells. And there was a very interesting video that I linked about the history of cell theory underneath the YouTube description of the day 1 video if you are curious. But let's go ahead and move on to part A. So I do want to draw your attention to here below that this is the most complex. And you can see there that's an elephant. And over here, this is the least complex. And we're going in this order as we talk about most to least complex in this image. But here up top, we're talking about least to most. And it's important to understand the levels of organization going from least complex to most complex and also in the opposite direction. So you may be asked questions like that on the regions. So organisms are organized in increasingly complex ways. They're organized from least complex to most complex. And complex means complicated. So, what does that mean? Well, when we're talking about the least complex, that is the smallest and least complicated part of an organism. And when we're talking about organelles, an example could be the mitochondria, like we see here, right? So the mitochondria is an organelle in the cell that is the powerhouse of the cell, as you may recall from day 1. The cell itself is our main focus of this component as we talk about cells. And then as we increase in organization, we're talking about tissues. So those are parts of your organs that go to organ systems, right? So as you can see, all the organelles are within the cell. All of the cells are within the tissues. All of the tissues are within the organs are within the organ system, and the organ system is within the organism. But don't worry if you don't understand that yet, because we're about to get a lot more specific. So, organelle, as you may recall from yesterday, refers to the functional parts of the cell, or the little mini organs within the cell that perform all the functions that an organ would inside of the organism itself. So the functional parts of the cell, they work together to carry out cellular activities. They are the least complex level of organization that we're going to discuss. So they are the smallest. An example could be the mitochondria, which looks like this. The cell, which is the building block of life, is next. And we're going from least complex to most complex. But remember, you could also discuss from most complex to least complex. So it is steps that go in order in both directions. So the cell is the building block of life. All living things are composed of cells. They can be one cell, unicellular, or multiple cells, multicellular, like us. Groups of similar cells work together to compose tissues. So, for example, in our body, we have many, many cells, and millions of cells, in fact, that all have identical DNA. However, the different cells may have different purposes. The cells that are in the tip of my pinky finger, for example, make up the tissue at the tip of my pinky finger. And the cells that are here are all similar to each other. They're different from, for example, the cells that are inside my brain or on the inside of my cheek or on the inside of my lungs, which are similar to each other. Those are examples of different types of cells that you can have. So an example could be a neuron, which is a brain cell, a skin cell, which is a cell in your skin, or a cheek cell, which is on the inside of your cheek. And we may get to view cheek cells under a microscope this year, if you're lucky. So next complex, as we go from, remember, smallest to getting larger now. So the organelle is really tiny on the inside of the cell. And now we have the cell that is still really, really tiny, usually far too small for the naked eye to observe, although we can see it under a microscope. Now we're talking about tissues. Tissues are large enough for us to observe with a microscope, and tissues are made up of a collection of cells. So tissues are composed of groups of similar cells to carry out a specific function. So an example of tissue could be kidney tissue, like the nephron. So that's the functional unit of your kidney. So basically what tissue is tissue is a part of an organ, right? Because we're getting larger. And next, after tissues, we have organs, which are composed of groups of similar tissues working out together to carry out a specific function. So hopefully you guys know lots of organs that you have in your own bodies, like our brain, kidney, heart, liver, etc. And those are all different organs. And just like in our body, all of our organs work together to keep us alive. Within the cell, all the different organelles work together to perform the basic life functions of the cell itself. Now, beyond organs, we have organ systems that are composed of groups of organs that work together to carry out a specific function. And you might be sensing a theme here. We are talking about things that work together to carry out functions. And that's what these levels of organization refer to. When we start at the smallest, all of the organelles are working together to maintain the cell. All of the cells are working together to maintain the tissues. All of the tissues are working together to maintain the organ. All the organs are working together to maintain the organ system. And all the organ systems are working together to maintain the organism. So what is an example of an organ system? We are talking about the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, nervous system, the endocrine system, right? Any body systems are included here in organ systems. And these are all human body systems, which we are going to talk about in Unit 5, but other organisms that are not humans also have organ systems. And then last but most, right? Not least, but now most complex or largest is the organism, composed of groups of organ systems that work together to carry out a specific function. Maintain life And typically, when we're talking about biology, not only do you want to survive, but you also want to reproduce, right? So that's what the organism is doing. Excuse me, that's what the organism is doing. But if we go back, so let's say I am the organism, right? I am a human. Within my body, I have an organ system, like let's say my nervous system, right? Because my nervous system is directing all my actions right now. That includes my brain. So I'm the organism, Miss Parsons. Within my body, I have the organ system, the nervous system, that helps control all of my actions that are working together to perform my specific goal of keeping me alive. And I haven't reproduced yet, but maybe someday. I have within my organ system of the nervous system, the organ that I've been talking about, my brain. Within my brain, I have tissue like gray matter, which is some of the tissue in your brain. Inside of there, I have the cells of my nervous system, which are called neurons. And within those neurons are all of the organelles that we talked about in day one, including the very important and critical mitochondria that powers all of these actions. So today we talked about levels of organization, and our aim was how are organisms organized. Hopefully you understand that a little bit better, and please don't forget to submit the exit ticket and your guided notes on Google Classroom. Have a super fantastic day, and don't forget to come with your questions prepared to our Zoom call tomorrow. Bye, guys.